In this movie, I'll show you how to adjust a few display preferences that aren't technically part of the workspace, but it's my guess that they'll provide you with an improved experience here inside Photoshop. Now, first of all, notice that the thumbnails inside the Layers panel are extremely small by default, so small that you can barely make out what's going on. If you want to make them larger, then you can right-click in this empty area below the last layer, in which case you'll get this shortcut menu, and you can choose either medium thumbnails to make the thumbnails a little bit larger, or you can right-click and choose large thumbnails in order to make them as large as possible. Now, it may be that if you have enough layers inside of a document, there will be no empty area at the bottom here. For example, if I switch over to this file here, and I've gone ahead and rasterized the text, by the way, converted the text to pixels, so you won't get a font warning. But notice that we have just gobs and gobs of layers. So there's no emptiness down here at the bottom. In that case, you click on the little flyout menu icon in the upper right corner of the Layers panel, and you choose this command way down here at the bottom, Panel Options. And then you'll see these sunflowers here that allow you to set the size of the thumbnail. Now, you do have the option of none. You don't have to have any thumbnails at all. If I click OK, now you'll see that we don't have any previews of our layers. We just see paintbrushes if they're pixel-based layers, and we see these little squares for vector layers and so forth, all of which we'll explore in more detail in future chapters and courses. But I really don't like working this way. Some folks do, and you might as well. But what I'd prefer to do is click on the flyout menu icon once again, choose Panel Options, and go ahead and select the biggest sunflower so we get the big thumbnails. Also notice these checkboxes down here at the bottom. I recommend you turn two of them off. First of all, turn off Add Copy, the word copy, to copied layers and groups, because it's really not very helpful just to add the word copy. You know it's a copy because you just made it, and all that does is force you to rename the layer something different. So this way, the copied layer will be named exactly the same as the original. I also recommend you turn off this checkbox. It's not a biggie, but what it does is it ensures that fill layers, including solid colors, gradients, and patterns, we'll see more of these guys in the future, that they don't automatically have layer masks, which is not necessary, and it just clutters up the panel. All right, now I'll click OK, and you can see that we've got our great big thumbnails now. All right, I'm going to switch to a more colorful image, this one here. And I'm also going to switch over to the Channels panel, which you can get just by clicking on its tab. You can also, as with all panels, you can go to the Window menu and choose its name. Now, notice that the Channels panel shows the various color channels required to create a full color composite image. So we've got RGB at the top, which stands for red, green, and blue. And then we have each of the independent channels that are required to make up an RGB image. So there's the red channel, there's the green channel, and there's the blue channel. Again, we'll visit this topic in more detail in a future course. But notice that we do have the very small thumbnails. If you want to make them bigger, just right-click in the empty area below, and I'm going to choose large. You can choose some other size if you like, and then I'll click on RGB to switch back to the composite color image. Next, click on Paths or choose Paths from the Window menu. We don't happen to have any paths in this document, but if we did, they would be very small. At least they would appear small inside this panel. To make sure they appear larger in the future, just right-click anywhere here and choose Large. And in the future, any paths that you draw will now be large, regardless of the image you're working in. All right, two more changes. Here inside the Color panel, notice that we're seeing the RGB sliders. I find those very difficult to work with in terms of dialing in colors, and a lot of other folks do as well because, for example, in order to get yellow, you crank red and green up to their maximum. So you have to mix red and green to get yellow, which to a lot of people doesn't make much sense. And besides, even if you know what you're doing, you just kind of have to track these colors that are constantly updating inside the sliders to figure out where you're going. Whereas, as you become more familiar with color theory, a much easier way to work is to step away from RGB or even CMYK and instead click on this flyout menu icon and choose HSB sliders, which stand for hue, saturation, and brightness. Hue, by the way, we'll see more of this in the future, but hue is the core color, measured almost as if we were working on a rainbow, and it's measured from 0 to 360 degrees. Then saturation is the intensity of the color from gray or white or black, depending on the brightness value, all the way to the most intense version of the color possible. And then brightness is what you would think it is. It goes all the way down to black and then all the way up to the brightest version of whatever color we're working on. And to me, that's a lot easier way to create colors, because even if you don't understand hue, which is the hardest of the sliders to predict, that is to say, you might not know right off the bat that 90 degrees is green, but you can actually see the colors right there in that slider bar. And then finally, I want you to go up to the window menu and choose Adjustments to bring up the Adjustments panel. Then click on its flyout menu icon and choose Add Mask by default to turn it off. And that way, your adjustment layers won't automatically receive layer masks. And that will help to reduce clutter inside the Layers panel. Once again, you can always add layer masks later if you want to. It's very easy to do, and I'll show you how that works later. In any case, that's all of our changes. Now, none of these changes are saved as part of the workspace. They are rather saved as global preferences. And the only way to save preferences in Photoshop is to quit the application. So I'm going to reset my colors here by clicking on this little icon, Default Foreground and Background Colors, which you can also get by pressing the D key down here at the bottom of the toolbox, because that's a global preference setting as well. And then I'll go up to the File menu here on the PC and choose the Exit command. On the Mac, you would go up to the Photoshop menu and choose the Quit command. You also have the keyboard shortcut of Control-Q here on the PC or Command-Q on the Mac. And not only did that quit Photoshop, but that also went ahead and saved every one of those changes that we just made. And that's how you adjust your display preferences as well as some layer mask settings to achieve what I consider to be the best working experience inside Photoshop.